Fire Eyes Media.
Today, we're doing something a little different than our lighthearted WTF episodes we typically rotate with. Normally, WTF stands for what the fuck, because that's kind of the reaction dumb criminals and more of the lighter side of true crime elicit out of you. And don't worry, we'll keep bringing you those episodes. But sometimes there's someone else's story that deserves to be heard.
Real people, impossible decisions, unthinkable moments. Before a headline, there was a human being. And behind every tragic moment, someone faced the unimaginable. This is WTF, what they faced. A glimpse into the lives, pressures, and final moments of people caught in extraordinary circumstances.
Today's story is haunting and heartbreaking. It's not a true crime story, but a real-life rescue drama that unfolded over about 27 hours. We'll walk through what happened to John Jones, how a fun family outing turned into a desperate struggle for survival deep underground in Nutty Putty Cave. We'll cover the timeline of John's descent, the misidentified passage that got him stuck, the massive rescue effort, and the tragic conclusion to the rescue attempt.
This is an emotional story, and there will be moments that are hard to hear, and we're going to keep it respectful and factual. But it's important to honor what John and the rescuers went through. We've researched official reports, news articles, and even incredible firsthand accounts from rescuers to make sure we get the details right. You'll even hear some quotes from those involved, family members and rescue personnel. I'm Amber.
And I'm Gina.
And this is what John Jones faced in Nutty Putty Cave.
Let's set the stage. It's November 24th, 2009, just 2 days before Thanksgiving. John Edwards Jones is home in Utah for the holiday, visiting family. He's a medical student at the University of Virginia, a husband, and a father to a 13-month-old daughter with another baby on the way.
John grew up spelunking with his dad and brother, so he's not a total novice to caving. To celebrate the reunion, John, his brother Josh, and some friends and family decide to go explore a popular local cave called Nutty Putty.
Nutty Putty Cave is about 55 miles from Salt Lake City, out west of Utah Lake. It was well known among Utah cavers for its tight, corkscrew-like tunnels and crawling passages. In fact, it had a bit of a reputation. There had been several non-fatal rescues there before.
At least 4 different times, people had gotten stuck and needed help to get out, which led authorities to implement a permit system and even temporarily close the cave in 2006. By 2009, Nutty Putty had only been reopened for a few months under stricter safety rules. So keep in mind, this cave was known to be tricky.
Right. Nutty Putty's narrow passages even had nicknames like the Birth Canal and the Scout Eater, because they are so small and challenging. The cave has about 1,400 feet of tunnels, and it's accessed through a single narrow hole on the surface of a hill.
You basically crawl in and then navigate like a subterranean maze. John, being around 6 feet tall and 190 pounds, was a big guy to be wriggling into these passages. But that evening, the group was excited and confident. After all, lots of people, including Boy Scouts, had explored Nutty Putty before without serious incident.
So, John, his brother Josh, and two others break off from the main group because they want to find a specific feature, a section of the cave dubbed the birth canal. The birth canal was a notoriously tight crawl that you could shimmy through and eventually reach a larger room at the end where you could turn around and come back.
It was kind of a rite of passage for adventurous cavers. They thought if they could conquer that, it would be a highlight of the trip. The trouble is, in the dark, winding tunnels of Nutty Putty, it's easy to take a wrong turn. And that appears to be exactly what happened.
As they went searching for the birth canal, John crawled through a low passage and believed he had found it. But he hadn't. He had unknowingly gone into an unmapped fissure, a passageway that was not the birth canal at all.
In the caving community, this tight, dead-end crevice is now known to be part of an area called Ed's Push, or also referred to as Bob's Push. Its entrance is very close to the real birth canal and looks similar, so it's an easy mistake to make. Unfortunately, Ed's Push is even narrower, and it does not open up at the end. It just pinches down tighter and tighter.
John slithered into this passage head first, moving forward inch by inch. The walls were pressing on his sides and chest. He must have thought the tunnel would widen eventually so he could turn around. Instead, it led him to an even narrower vertical chute, basically a downward sloping tunnel that suddenly dropped almost straight down.
The passage was only about 10 inches high and 18 inches across. Incredibly tight. But John believed this might be the birth canal squeeze with a larger room just beyond. So he kept going, wriggling deeper.
At some point, gravity took over. He slid down that vertical fissure head first and could not wriggle back out. He was wedged in place, upside down, at roughly a 70-degree angle downward.
Try to picture it. Most of his body is encased in rock. His arms are pinned, headlamp probably only lighting dusty rock inches from his face. He can't turn around and he can't back up. And because the tunnel bends, he's basically stuck around a corner in an L-shaped section of rock.
That was about 9 or 9:30 p.m. on November 24th when John realized he was completely stuck and in serious trouble. John's brother Josh was nearby when it happened. Josh made his way through the tunnel feeling a creeping apprehension, and when he saw John's feet and how engulfed he was in the rock, he knew the situation was serious.
He tried to help immediately. Imagine the panic. Josh wrapped his feet around John's calves and pulled, trying to free him. But John only slid down further, getting more tightly wedged. In fact, pulling inadvertently made John's situation worse. He became tightly jammed, nearly upside down, with one arm pinned underneath him and the other forced backward.
He was essentially trapped, standing on his head, but contorted and unable to move in any direction. At that point, Josh knew they needed outside help. Before climbing back out of the tunnel, the brothers did something that speaks to their upbringing and desperation. Josh paused and prayed out loud. He later said his first instinct was to pray for guidance and a miracle.
After that prayer, the group scrambled to a position where a cell phone could get reception and called 911. That call went out around 9:30 p.m. So John is deep in the cave, trapped. And now the clock is ticking. Being stuck upside down is more than just uncomfortable. It's extremely dangerous physically.
When your body is inverted for too long, blood starts pooling in your head and upper body. Your heart has to work impossibly hard to circulate, and your organs are under strain. If rescue doesn't come fast, an upside down person can black out or worse. So the race was on.
The call for help quickly mobilized a huge response. Within about an hour, the first rescue crews arrived at the remote cave site. This was in a relatively isolated area called Sunshine Canyon near Utah Lake. By late that night, teams from Utah County Sheriff's Search and Rescue, local fire departments, and expert cavers from across the state were converging on Nutty Putty Cave.
In the end, more than 100 rescue personnel would be involved. It was one of the largest cave rescue efforts in U.S. history. But reaching John was not easy. Just getting a rescuer down to where he was stuck meant navigating the same tight maze John had gone through.
The first person to actually reach John was a volunteer rescuer named Susie Motola, who arrived around 12:30 a.m. in the early hours of November 25th. Susie was a petite, experienced caver, exactly the kind of person needed to thread through those tight passages.
When Susie finally inched close enough to see John, he actually greeted her. He said, "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming, but I really, really want to get out." Susie assessed the situation and tried to keep John calm. But what she found was daunting.
As we said, John was nearly upside down. He was at least 125 feet below the surface and about 700 feet deep in the winding cave from the entrance. He was wedged in a shaft so narrow that rescuers could barely reach him, let alone work around him.
One rescuer later described it as absolutely the worst spot in the cave to be stuck. They could touch John. At one point, rescuers managed to grab hold of his feet and even hold his hand to comfort him. But pulling him straight out by brute force was impossible without injuring him or the rescuer. They needed a plan.
Above ground, more help kept arriving. By the early morning hours of November 25th, the cave entrance was a busy staging area with ropes, pulleys, medical gear, and generators. Rescue teams set up floodlights and communication lines. Family members gathered anxiously nearby in the cold night. The media had also started to assemble as dawn approached, because word was spreading about a man trapped in Nutty Putty Cave.
The rescuers' plan was to use a rope and pulley system, essentially a custom-built mechanical advantage rig, to slowly haul John out of the narrow passage. But first, they had to make enough space around him.
Working in shifts, teams began carefully chipping away at the rock around John with air-powered drills and chisels. God, can you imagine? They are in a tight tunnel, lying on their stomachs or backs, trying to carve away rock inches from a trapped man's body, all while being careful not to hurt him.
That sounds so daunting. They also had to drill anchor points into the cave walls to attach ropes, which was tricky. At one point, their drill equipment wasn't working well, which cost precious time. As this is happening, John's condition is a huge concern. Remember, he's been head down for hours at this point. Rescuers knew they had to act fast, but also cautiously.
They talked to John constantly to keep him alert and hopeful. They even started singing to him. In fact, John's family later said that the rescuers sang hymns, familiar LDS primary songs, to help comfort him through the long night. In that pitch-dark crawl space, these songs and voices were likely a lifeline for John, something to focus on beyond the pain and fear. They knew they were running short on time because as time went on and John was talking, his voice was growing more nasally, his breathing becoming labored. His lungs were starting to fill with fluid.
John's family members were gathered at the surface, praying and waiting. They set up a radio communication system so that John could hear his loved ones. At one point on Wednesday, the rescuers managed to get a police radio down to John. Through it, he had a brief but uplifting conversation with his wife, Emily.
Emily was outside the cave, and she told John that she loved him. Family on the scene also relayed messages. According to one rescuer's account, John's father even gave him a blessing over the radio, and Emily said a prayer with him, telling John she felt a sense of peace, that everything would be okay.
Hearing his wife's voice gave John a much-needed morale boost, even as he was trapped in darkness. Despite the agony of his predicament, John tried to stay positive. His brother later said, "He's been really tough under the circumstances. There were periods of panic, disorientation, but he's in good spirits now."
Rescuers were amazed at how resilient he was, cracking a joke here or there and remaining responsive. This mental toughness helped sustain everyone's hope. Finally, after many hours of painstaking work, some progress. By late afternoon on November 25th, John had been stuck for roughly 19 to 20 hours, and the team was ready to attempt the big pull.
They had rigged a series of ropes and pulleys anchored to the cave walls and large rocks on the surface. Sometime around 4:30 p.m. Wednesday, they gave the word to start hoisting. Inch by inch, John's body began to move. It was excruciatingly slow. He'd been virtually glued in by pressure and gravity, but the system was working. He was coming out of the crevice.
This pulley system had freed a 5'7", 140-pound teen back in 2004 from the cave. But John was bigger, further down the tunnel, and they could only reach about 6 inches of John's legs. You can imagine the mix of hope and pain in that moment. After being head down for over 8 hours and stuck overall for nearly a day, John's legs and feet finally emerged from that tight fissure. Rescuers were able to shift him into a slightly more horizontal position.
He was still deep in the cave, but no longer wedged in that exact 10 by 18 pinch. Relief washed through the rescue team. People topside heard the news and started to celebrate. They even cracked open some pizza and water that had been waiting, smiling in tentative relief. They believed the worst was over.
With John partially freed, medics in the cave quickly gave him an IV for hydration and medication and provided food and water, things they hadn't been able to get to him before. John was able to speak and even converse a bit more freely now.
Yeah, he must have felt a flood of hope, especially after enduring so many hours upside down. At this point, he reportedly said softly, "Thank you," to the rescuers helping him. Everyone thought it was just a matter of carefully hauling him the rest of the way up and out. The team kept pulling and pulling, but John's feet hit the tunnel's low ceiling, and with his heart struggling to keep blood flowing to his legs, when he hit the ceiling, he cried out in pain.
They realized that because of the angle of the tunnel, they couldn't bend John's body backward without inflicting serious injury to John's legs. And in his weakened state, the shock might kill him. But then the unthinkable happened. One of the main anchors in the cave, a bolt drilled into the rock to hold the pulley system, suddenly failed. The limestone rock itself gave away. In an instant, the entire rope system slipped, and John's body slid back down into the claustrophobic hole with force.
He dropped right back into the same crevice that held him before. It was a devastating setback. One rescuer described hearing a horrible scraping sound as John fell back into the wedge. In that moment, all the progress was erased. John was essentially back to square one, trapped in the exact place he'd been a day before.
You can imagine the surge of terror and despair John must have felt as he slid back. And for the rescuers, it was a nightmare. their worst fear coming true just when success felt close. And also, when John fell back in, one of the rescuers that was down there with him, his name was Ryan. Ryan got smacked hard in the face by a carabiner. And even though John had been shoved back into that space, he kept asking, "How's Ryan? Is Ryan okay?" They later determined the bolt failure was due to the rock's integrity. The anchor itself had been placed correctly, but the rock couldn't handle the stress.
After the accident with the pulley, the cave fell silent except for John's labored breathing. The rescuers, exhausted and heartbroken, regrouped to figure out what to do next. As evening turned to night on Wednesday, John had now been trapped for over 24 hours straight.
The situation was described by one official as tenuous at best. John was alive, but his condition was deteriorating. He had been upside down for so long that it was taking a deadly toll on his body. He was having trouble breathing, and his heart was under immense strain. He was also starting to lose touch with reality. At one point, he asked a rescuer down there with him, "Why did you guys put me here?"
According to reports, at some point after the pulley failure, John uttered a gut-wrenching admission. In a moment of despair, he said, "I'm going to die right here. I'm not going to come out of here, am I?" It's hard to imagine how that felt. For John, who had fought so hard, and for the rescuers, hearing him say those words.
They tried to reassure him, telling him, "No, we are going to get you out." They refused to give up. As one rescuer later said, "As long as he's in there, there will be people in there with him working." And they truly meant it.
Rescue crews kept rotating through the night. Some personnel had been on scene for a full 24 hours or more without rest. They brought in fresh teams from various agencies, determined to try another strategy if one could be found. Outside, John's family and friends held vigil, hoping for a miracle.
His wife, Emily, was reportedly calm and strong, surrounded by loved ones. The rescuers noted how supportive and incredibly solid the family was through this ordeal. They understood everyone was doing everything possible. Unfortunately, John's body was reaching its limit.
He had now been inverted for over a full day. Despite rescuers getting air and IV fluids to him, his circulation was failing. Sometime before midnight on the 25th, John became unresponsive. A medical professional on the rescue team crawled in as far as they could to check on him.
Brandon Kowalis, a member of the Utah Cave Rescue, arrived and took over for another rescuer. Brandon checked on John and discovered he was unresponsive. At around 11:50 p.m., the paramedic crawled into the cave and pronounced John dead. Brandon had been the last person to see John alive, even though he had been mostly unconscious by the time Brandon arrived.
The official cause of death was cardiac arrest and probably suffocation, brought on by the strain of being upside down and compressed for so long. The human body isn't built to sustain itself upside down for that extended period of time, and John's body just couldn't take it anymore. It's such a heartbreaking outcome. The rescuers on site were absolutely crushed.
They had given everything, physically, mentally, emotionally, to save this young man, and now he was gone. Utah County Sergeant Spencer Cannon later said, "We weren't able to get him out quick enough," and he acknowledged the emotional toll it took on everyone. Around 2:30 a.m., officials made the sad announcement to the gathered media and family that John had passed away and that the rescue operation was now a recovery mission. John's wife, Emily, and other family members who had been waiting at the scene had left shortly after being told of his death, their hearts broken, but remarkably composed in faith and support for the rescuers.
In the aftermath, John's family released a public statement that gives a sense of who he was. They said John will be remembered for his good nature, delightful sense of humor, strong work ethic, a love of and unwavering faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and his commitment to his family as an amazing husband, father, son, and brother. They also expressed deep gratitude to the rescuers, saying they knew everyone did all they could to get John out, including singing primary songs to help him get through the night. And in a very poignant line, the family said, "We'll never fully understand how or why it was John's time to leave us, but we find comfort knowing that he fulfilled his purpose here on earth and that we will be reunited with him again." Their words showed incredible grace and faith amid tragedy.
Now that John was gone, the focus shifted to the recovery of his body. Rescuers actually planned to continue working that Thanksgiving day to try to retrieve him. They even started discussing new ideas. At one point, people considered using heavy equipment or widening the passage.
But it quickly became clear that extracting John's body would be extremely dangerous to the rescuers and possibly structurally unsound for the cave. John was stuck in a very precarious spot, and removing him could trigger a collapse or put others at risk. After everything that had happened, nobody wanted another injury or worse.
By the next day, Friday, November 27th, 2009, officials made a heartbreaking and extraordinary decision. John's body would be left in place, and Nutty Putty Cave would be permanently closed. The landowners, government authorities, and John's family all agreed that this was the best course of action.
It was simply too dangerous to recover him. In a way, John had sacrificed himself to ensure no one else suffered the same fate, because the result was that the cave would be shut for good as a safety measure.
How exactly do you close a cave? In this case, they decided to seal it forever by destroying the dangerous section and blocking all entrances. Rescue workers placed explosives in the tunnel where John was trapped, the section called Ed's Push, and collapsed that part of the cave so it filled in around his body.
Then engineers poured concrete into the main entrance and any other known openings of Nutty Putty Cave. They effectively entombed John in the cave, making the entire system inaccessible. Nutty Putty Cave became John Jones's final resting place.
This was a controversial decision in the caving community. Some cavers were very upset that an entire cave was being closed off indefinitely. The man who originally discovered Nutty Putty Cave back in 1960, Dale Green, argued that only the dangerous section should be sealed and the rest of the cave could have been kept open.
He said that one spot had been a problem for years, and even admitted that he himself had gotten stuck in that same section decades earlier, though he was pulled out safely. Other caving enthusiasts felt that closing the cave was an overreaction, saying people accept risks when they go caving, and proper management, like gating off the narrow section, could have been enough.
Despite those objections, the authorities stood firm. The cave's owners and the county didn't want any more lives in danger. They proceeded with the permanent closure. In fact, not long after John's death, a few individuals tried to sneak into the area to possibly explore or prevent the closure, but they were stopped and cited for trespassing.
The community overall understood that this tragedy was the final straw. Nutty Putty had claimed a life, and no one wanted to risk a repeat. By sealing the cave, they also, in a sense, made it sort of a memorial tomb for John. John's family, for their part, supported the decision. They believed John would rest in peace there.
It's reported that they considered the cave John's resting place, a sacred thing. He loved caving, and he ultimately passed doing something he found adventurous. There's a small comfort in knowing he wasn't disturbed afterward. That was always my main thought.
Mm-hmm.
A plaque was placed on the rock outside in his memory, and to this day, Nutty Putty Cave remains completely closed.
The legacy of this incident has been far-reaching. For Utah's caving community and rescue teams, it was a traumatic event, but also a learning experience. It led to a renewed emphasis on cave safety and training for technical rescues. A lot of rescuers were praised for their heroic efforts. They truly did everything humanly possible.
Sergeant Spencer Cannon said later, I reviewed the whole mission, wishing we'd done this tiny detail differently or that a little sooner. But it's no use second-guessing things. We did our best. This tragedy underscored how even the best efforts and intentions sometimes aren't enough against nature and physics.
The story of John Jones also spread beyond Utah. It became something of a cautionary tale for spelunkers everywhere, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in an uncharted crawl space. Several documentaries and articles were made about the Nutty Putty incident. Perhaps most notably, a feature film called The Last Descent was released in 2016, dramatizing John's story and the rescue attempt.
John's widow, Emily, was involved in consulting for that film, and she has spoken publicly about her journey through grief. In the years after, Emily showed incredible resilience. She gave birth to their second child, a boy whom she named John in honor of his father, and eventually she found love again and remarried, finding a path to healing. In a 2014 interview, 5 years after the accident, she said that it had been a long, difficult road, but she found ways to emerge from the darkness of that loss.
It's inspiring to see that John's family kept his memory alive, but also continued living. They'll never forget what happened. None of us who've heard this story will. And for the rescuers, even though they didn't get the outcome they prayed for, many of them have said that they take solace in knowing that they tried everything. It's clear that this incident left a mark on all who were there.
Today, Nutty Putty Cave is essentially a grave. If you visit the area, there's nothing much to see. Just a filled-in hole on a hillside and perhaps some of the markers we mentioned earlier. But John's story continues to echo in the caving and rescue communities. His death led to changes that likely saved others' lives by preventing further exploration of that dangerous cave. In that sense, the legacy of Nutty Putty Cave is one of the hard lessons learned and precautions taken.
This story has lived in my head rent-free for so long. And we've talked about this story and wanted to cover it and the best way to do it. And you did such a great job covering it and in a respectable way. And it really boggles me. Like, I'm not a person to do this kind of thing. It scares the crap out of me. You will never find me in a tight place, in a cave, doing anything like this. Amber's shaking her head no. I agree that it was the most respectful thing to do to close the whole thing down, because they closed it down and people still tried to go or stop. And you can't just say, well, just close it off and people won't go into the section. They will, though.
And that's the thing, because they know there is a body on the other side of whatever barricade.
Absolutely.
Some people suck, sorry. And they would have done everything that they could to go back there. So yes, I get what other people were saying about just closing that off, but no, maybe if people didn't completely suck, then they could have tried that. But no, this was.
It's the best way to respect him.
Yeah.
And what happened is to close it off.
You don't go. It's frowned upon to go into a cemetery and start poking around at the plots and like trying to dig to get to the caskets. This is John's resting place. This is his burial site. Going there when he's still there, it's like, oh, but that also kind of reminds me of Everest, which is.
Absolutely. It's that morbid curiosity thing that we talked about. Yep. And like, kudos to him for being involved in this kind of activity, especially given he was such a big dude. I mean, Corey's 6'1", and about the same weight. And I could not imagine him going into anything that small. And so to be brave enough to put yourself into a situation like that is so commendable.
I was talking to one of my besties about this because, I talked to her about everything. And she had said that, like, this is one of her, like, top 3 worst fears, aside from being lost at sea or lost out in space. And I said, oh, no, ma'am. You shove me out in the middle of nowhere and sea or space or something like that, because at least you can see. At least you can breathe. At least there's something that you can see. Being trapped in a cave in a tight space like John was is my ultimate literal worst nightmare.
Able to move.
I would not. How he handled it, he was so polite to every rescuer that came down there. He was so thoughtful and caring about their well-being and how they were doing. He was cracking jokes and bringing humor to the situation, just doing everything that he could. Ugh.
I know. Just a testament to the kind of person he was, that he's
Absolutely.
worried about the other people that are trying to save him.
Yep.
It's just, and it just sucks. It's always the good ones that this stuff happens to, Oh man. Yeah, this has been a heavy story. And our hearts go out to John Jones' family and the people that fought so hard to save him. It's a stark reminder of how fragile life can be and how even a familiar adventure can turn in an instant. What's striking is the humanity shown throughout. John's own courage and even courtesy in the face of death, like we were saying, his first words to Susie when she reached him. The brotherhood and faith between John and Josh as they prayed together. See, now I'm emotional because this story has been in my head for so long. The rescuers singing to keep hope alive, and the family's gracious statement afterward. There was a lot of love and community in that dark cave alongside the fear.
We want to thank you for sticking with us throughout this intense episode. Not every story has a heroic rescue or happy ending, but there is always something to learn from what they faced. We hope we've honored John's memory by telling his story with the respect it deserves. And to John, we never met you, but we won't forget what you faced.
Until next time, stay safe.
And make good choices.
Bye.
Bye.